Parents used me to pay their debts, and then they went on luxury vacation with my money. When they came back, what happened next shocked them, and now they are in big trouble. Have you ever been used by your own family? I mean, really used, like you were some kind of ATM that never runs out of money. I never thought I'd be that guy. But here I am, telling this because honestly, I still can't believe how far they went. The worst part? I didn't see it coming. It all started about a year ago. I was finally in a good place. I'm a doctor, which means long hours and a lot of stress, but at least the money is decent. I'd moved out years ago, got my own place, and figured I'd be able to focus on myself for a while. But life sometimes has other plans. My parents have been struggling for a while. They didn't always tell me, but I could tell something was wrong. Then one day my mother called. She sounded serious, like life or death. "Oscar, we're in trouble," she said, getting right to the point. She and my dad were deep in debt. They had credit card bills piling up, medical expenses from an old surgery my dad had a few years ago, and a mortgage payment they couldn't make. My dad's construction job had dried up, and my mom wasn't working at all. The stress in her voice hit me hard. They didn't know where to turn. "You're the only one who can help us," she added. I've always been the oldest, the one who had to set an example for my 4 younger siblings. My siblings looked up to me. 2 brothers, 2 sisters, all under the age of 18. I couldn't stand the thought of them going without food or losing their home, so I agreed to help. At first, it really felt like I was saving them. I sent them $4,000 to cover their most pressing debts. They said they were catching up on bills, paying off credit cards, and buying food. For the first few weeks, I felt good. I thought I was making a difference. But then the calls kept coming. "Hey, Oscar, the car broke down," my dad said one day. Another day it was, "Oscar, we're out of food again. We need gas money. Your sister's phone isn't working, and she needs it for school. Your brother's tuition is overdue." Every day there was something new, and every day I'd send money. $100 here, $150 there. Some days $200. It was constant. At first I told myself it was temporary. They were still getting back on their feet. But as the weeks turned into months, I began to feel the weight of it all. By the second month, I was exhausted mentally, emotionally, and financially. I decided to cut back. Instead of sending money every day, I switched to sending larger amounts twice a week. I thought this would help them budget better and give me a break. But it didn't work. The requests just kept getting bigger. "We need $300 for the water bill." My mother would say, "The electricity is about to be turned off." My dad would say another time. It was always urgent. Always life or death. I began to notice that things weren't adding up. No matter how much money I sent, they never seemed to make any real progress. The debts never went away. The bills kept coming, and I couldn't understand why. But I didn't want to ask too many questions. I kept telling myself that if I stopped helping, my siblings would be the ones to suffer. I had this picture in my head of my little sister going to bed hungry, or my little brother not being able to go to school. That fear kept me going. I'd visit them sometimes just to check in, and you know what's crazy? My parents didn't seem too stressed when I saw them. They were always just fine, relaxed even. My dad would sit around and watch TV. My mom didn't seem to be looking for work, but I didn't question it. Not yet. That would come later, much later. And when the truth finally hit me, it hit me like a truck. Things finally started to unravel on August 28th. I'll never forget that day. I was at the hospital, finishing up a long shift, when I got a call from a neighbor of my parents. It was Mrs. Peterson, a sweet old lady who lived a few doors down from them. "Hi, Oscar," she said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been a lot of noise coming from your parents' house. I thought you should know." My mind went straight to the worst. Maybe something had happened to my siblings. Were my parents fighting? Did someone get hurt? I thanked her and told her I'd look into it. I didn't waste any time. I got in my car and drove the 2 hours to her house that night. When I got there, everything looked normal from the outside. I opened the front door and walked in. My younger siblings were there, scattered around the living room. My 15-year-old brother, Tyler, was playing video games. My 8-year-old sister, Lily, was drawing at the dining room table. The youngest, Emma and Max, were playing with toys on the floor. Relief washed over me for a second. They were safe. But then I noticed something strange. My parents weren't there. Hey, where are Mom and Dad? I asked Tyler. He barely looked up from his game. Oh, they went on vacation, he said casually, like it was no big deal. I froze. Vacation? What do you mean vacation? They left a few days ago. Lily chimed in. They said they'd be back soon. They made sandwiches and told us not to answer the door. I felt my blood pressure rise. They went on vacation? With whose money? I've been working my ass off to keep them afloat, and they just left? And worse, they left my siblings behind like they were an afterthought. I was furious. I tried to keep my cool for the kids. I didn't want to scare them. Instead, I told them I'd stay with them for a few days. I didn't want to leave them alone in that house. I spent the next 3 days with my siblings, taking care of them and waiting for my parents to return. On the third day, Tyler got a call from our dad. He told Tyler that they were coming home the next day. He didn't even ask how the kids were. That was the moment I knew I had to confront them. But I wanted to catch them off guard, so I told Tyler not to mention that I was staying with them. When they finally arrived the next day, Tyler gave me a quick call, and I got to the house in record time. I walked in just as they were unloading their luggage. They didn't expect to see me standing there. My dad froze, and my mom looked like a deer caught in the headlights. Hey, I said, trying to keep my tone even. How was the trip? They stumbled over their words, coming up with some half-baked story about how it wasn't really a vacation, just a last-minute trip for one night. I let them ramble on for a while, nodding along like I was buying their excuses. But then I hit them with the truth. I know you've been gone for days, and I know where you went. Some expensive resort by the ocean, right? Silence. My mom looked at my dad, her face turning red. Who told you that? She muttered. Does it matter? I snapped. I want to know how you could afford it. And don't lie to me. I've been sending you money for months, money I thought was for bills and food for the kids. And you used it to take a luxury vacation? Her nervous energy turned to defensiveness. My dad tried to play it off, saying they deserved a break after all the stress they'd been under. My mother added that they thought it would be okay because I always helped out. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They had left 4 children, one only 3 years old, alone in the house, so they could sip cocktails on the beach. That was the last straw. I stood there in disbelief, watching my parents scramble for excuses. We deserve a break, my dad said again, as if that justified everything. My mom nodded and added, You don't understand how stressful this has been for us. Stressful? For them? I clenched my jaw. Yeah, I bet it's really stressful when you're blowing other people's money on vacations. They didn't even flinch. My dad crossed his arms and scoffed. We've been through a lot, Oscar. You wouldn't understand. You don't have kids. This was the least we could do for ourselves after all we've been through. I couldn't believe the audacity. I shot back. You're right, I don't have children. But apparently neither do you, because no responsible parent leaves their kids alone for days like this. That hit a nerve. My mother's expression hardened. We didn't leave them in danger, she said. We made sure they had food and told Tyler to watch them. He's almost an adult. They were fine. Tyler is 15. I snapped. And Emma is 3. You thought it was okay to put that responsibility on a teenager? What if something happened while you were away? Were you planning on swimming back from your resort to deal with it? They didn't answer. My mother just looked away, but I wasn't finished. Do you know how much I gave you? Over $4,000 to pay off your debts. Hundreds more every week. I've worked double shifts just to keep the money coming because I thought you were struggling to keep the lights on. I shook my head. You didn't even try to get a job. You just took advantage of me. We needed help. My father shot back. You're a doctor. You can afford it. That was it. I lost any shred of sympathy I had left Are you serious? I can afford it because I bust my ass every day. And you? You sat around and milked me dry like it was your right. Then something unexpected happened. My mother finally cracked. Fine. Maybe we didn't handle it perfectly. But you wouldn't have helped if we hadn't made it sound urgent. I blinked. Wait, are you telling me you lied about some of these emergencies? She didn't answer. Her silence was all the confirmation I needed. Every time they begged for money, groceries, broken appliances, overdue bills, it had all been a game. I stood there shaking with rage. My mind flashed back to all the times I'd stayed up worrying about them, stressing over whether my siblings had enough to eat or if their electricity was about to be turned off. Meanwhile, they were out living it up on the money I sent them. I'm done, I finally said. I will not send you another cent. You used me. And now you've put your children in danger because of your selfishness. My father laughed bitterly. What? So now you're just going to abandon us? You can't do that. We're family. Oh, I'm not abandoning anyone, I said, narrowing my eyes. The kids are coming with me. That caught them off guard. My mother's face twisted in shock. You can't take them. Why not? You obviously don't care about them. You left her home alone for days while you went off to get drunk and sunbathe. And don't even try to deny it. I can smell the alcohol on both of you. They stumbled for an answer. My dad mumbled something about it being just a couple of drinks, but I didn't hear it. I'd already made up my mind. The kids were already on board. I had talked to Tyler and the others during those 3 days, and it turned out that this wasn't the first time my parents had pulled a stunt like this. They had just never been gone this long. When I asked them if they'd be okay coming with me, they all agreed without hesitation. That moment broke my heart. They didn't even resist. That's how bad things had gotten. My parents tried to argue, but I shut them down. You're lucky I haven't reported you yet. I warned, but maybe I should. I gathered the kids and their things and walked out the door, leaving my parents standing there in shock. I wasn't playing games anymore. Taking the kids with me was a bigger move than I had planned, but I wasn't going to leave them in that toxic environment any longer. I put them in my car and drove back to my house. They were quiet the whole way, especially Tyler. I think it finally hit him that things were about to change. When we got to my place, I helped them settle in. It wasn't exactly childproof. I didn't have enough beds for everyone, but we made it work for the night. I ordered pizza, and for the first time in days, that actually seemed relaxed. No one asked when our parents were going to call or come pick them up. No one seemed worried about going back. That spoke volumes to me. The next morning, I received a barrage of texts from my parents. First, it was guilt. Mom, Oscar, you can't take the kids. You're being unreasonable. Dad, bring them home now, or we'll have to call the police. Then it turned into outright threats. Dad, if you don't take them back, you'll regret it. I didn't respond. Instead, I called a lawyer. I knew I had to protect myself and the children legally. I explained everything that had happened, how my parents had abandoned the children for days, how they'd left a 15-year-old in charge of toddlers, how they'd lied for months about their financial situation while using the money I'd sent them to fund their own vacations and lifestyles. The lawyer didn't mince words. That's serious neglect. He said, you may have a case for guardianship, but you'll have to act fast. I hadn't thought about it that way, actually taking legal custody of my siblings. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I couldn't trust my parents to take care of them anymore. The next few days were a blur of paperwork and meetings. I filed a formal petition for guardianship, citing neglect and abandonment. My lawyer also advised me to document everything: texts, bank transfers, any evidence I had of the money I'd sent and how it was being misused. It was overwhelming, but I knew I had to go through with it. Meanwhile, my parents didn't take the news well. They showed up at my apartment 2 days later, banging on the door like crazy. Oscar, open the damn door. My dad yelled, you think you could just take our kids? I opened the door, but didn't let them in. Steele, you abandoned them. You left them for days without any adult supervision. That's not parenting, that's neglect. My mother started to cry, but this time I didn't fall for it. She tried to play the victim. We're struggling, Oscar. We needed a break. We didn't want things to get out of control. A break? You think struggling gives you the right to ditch your kids and go party with the money I work for? Do you hear yourself right now? I shook my head in disbelief. This wasn't just one mistake. You've been lying to me for months. I'm done with the excuses. We're her parents. My father barked. You can't just take her away from us. Listen to me. I said, the court will hear everything. You two are unfit. And you know it. They tried to argue, but I wouldn't have it. If you keep harassing me, I'll get a restraining order. I warned. That shut them up real quick. They stormed off, but I could tell this wasn't over. I knew they'd try something. I just didn't know how far they'd go. After my parents stormed out, I thought things would calm down for a while. I was wrong. The next bombshell didn't come from my parents. It came from my siblings. It started when I sat with Tyler later that night. I could tell something was bothering him. So I asked, hey, are you okay? You've been pretty quiet. He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. I need to tell you something. What is it? I asked, pulling myself together. They didn't use your money for bills. He said bluntly, at least not all of it. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? They were always saying things like, oh, Oscar sent us money. Let's treat ourselves. They'd go out to fancy restaurants. Sometimes they buy new clothes or things for themselves. Like Dad's watch and Mom's new purse. I blinked, trying to process this. You're serious? He nodded. Dead serious. And it's not like they spent much on us. We got food, but just enough to last a few days. Half the time we didn't have enough food. So I try to stretch it out for Emma and Max. I tell them I wasn't hungry, so they could eat more. Hearing that hit me harder than any punch ever could. My siblings, my little brother and sisters had gone hungry, while my parents lived like royalty on my money. I had been working extra shifts, stressing myself out, thinking I was saving them. And this was the reality. It wasn't just Tyler who opened up. The others started talking. To Lily told me that there were times when they had to eat nothing but sandwiches for a week. Emma, the youngest, said she didn't even like staying home because Mom and Dad were always mad or gone. Even Max, who was usually shy, admitted that their parents paid little attention to them. They didn't care about us. Tyler added, they only cared when they wanted us to behave so they could look good to the neighbors or their friends. That night we sat down and had a long talk. I asked them, do you want to go back to them? The answer was unanimous. They didn't. They said they felt safe with me. Tyler even joked, at least we get to eat here. This conversation was a turning point. I knew I was doing the right thing by seeking custody, but hearing it directly from them gave me even more motivation. They hadn't just been neglected, they had been emotionally and physically abused. And they trusted me to protect them. Over the next few days, I gathered more evidence. I documented everything my siblings told me, from the times they went hungry to the times my parents left them alone for entire weekends. I also found records of some of the unnecessary purchases my parents had made. There was no way they could argue that this wasn't neglect. Meanwhile, my parents continued to try to contact me. They sent long, guilt-ridden texts about how I was tearing them apart. They even got some relatives involved, but no one really knew the whole story. I didn't care. I wasn't going to be manipulated again. The kids stayed with me, and I kept things as normal as possible for them. They began to open up more, and for the first time in what seemed like forever, they were actually happy. They laughed. They played without fear. It broke my heart to think how different their lives had been before, but I knew the battle wasn't over. My parents wouldn't give up easily. I knew my parents would try something desperate, and I was right. A week after I filed for custody, I found out they were planning to fight me in court. I received a letter from their lawyers saying that they were claiming that I had kidnapped the children and was trying to turn them against their parents. I couldn't believe how far they were willing to go to distort the truth. But I wasn't afraid. I had everything I needed: evidence, witnesses, and most importantly, the testimony of my siblings. They were old enough to speak for themselves, and their words carried weight. Tyler told the court about the neglect, the starvation, and the lies. Lily backed him up, explaining how her parents spent money on themselves while the children went without. My parents, on the other hand, didn't have much of a defense. They kept trying to play the victim, blaming stress and hard times. But the judge didn't buy it, especially after he saw the bank statements showing how they'd blown thousands of dollars on luxuries while telling me they couldn't afford food. It didn't take long for the court to rule in my favor. I was granted full guardianship of my siblings, and my parents were given limited visitation rights on neutral territory and under supervision. They were furious, of course. My father stormed out of the courtroom, and my mother cried that I'd betrayed them. But I didn't care anymore. I was done being manipulated. For a while, they still tried to make things difficult. They'd miss scheduled visits or show up late, trying to create drama. Eventually, though, they stopped showing up altogether. I heard through the grapevine that they started drinking heavily. Their lives were spiraling out of control, and soon they wanted nothing to do with the children or me. I thought this might hurt my siblings, but it didn't. They had already made their peace. Tyler once told me they were never really there for us anyway. We're better off now. And he was right. Life was finally starting to look up for all of us. I made sure the kids were taken care of, really taken care of. No more worrying about where their next meal was coming from. I stocked the refrigerator with everything they liked. I took them shopping for new clothes and toys. Emma and Max had never been so excited. Their faces lit up when I told them they could pick out anything they wanted. I even set up a playroom for Tyler and Lily. Tyler got a game console, and Lily finally had a real place to do her art projects. It was little things like that, things that most kids take for granted, that made the biggest difference. We established new routines. I helped them with their homework, cooked dinner every night, and made sure we spent time together. We went to the park, watched movies, and celebrated every birthday and holiday like it was the most important day in the world. The laughter in the house was constant, something that had been missing for years. One night, while we were watching a movie, Emma climbed onto my lap. She looked up at me and said, "I'm glad we live with you now." That one sentence made it all worthwhile. I'd given them a chance at a real childhood, a chance to be happy. They deserved it, and so did I.